Hello, everybody. This is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. It's May 2nd, and I'm recording this video to give us a little preview of the Astrology of May. I'm currently visiting family in Michigan, so I'm in a guest room right now, and I had hoped that I would get this recorded before I left, but I did not have time. So I thought I'd just make a video here and post it. This month is one of the most eagerly anticipated months of 2018, and really of, in some ways, of the past few years for astrologers, because the planet Uranus is about to enter Taurus, and that's going to happen on the 15th of this month. At the exact same time, there's a new moon in Taurus, right around that same time, on the 15th. Mercury will ingress into Taurus. And the planet Mars on the 16th, right afterward, is going to ingress into Aquarius and immediately will square Uranus. So the middle of the month is the really big stuff this May. There are some things that we're going to talk about outside of this, but these are the big things. As usual, make sure that you visit astrograph.com. I'll actually write that in for you guys over here. www.astrograph.com. Check out their horoscopes, because I write the monthly sun sign columns at Astrograph. So if you check those out and read for your sun, your moon, or your rising sign, you can also get a bit of a detailed forecast about the month to come. I am also this month doing a special on the entrance of Uranus into Taurus. So if you would like, you can visit my website, nightlightastrology.com. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And if you go to the events page, there's a drop-down menu, and visit the donations and payments tab. And if you make a payment of between $40 and $75 suggested donation, and then email me, and I'll give you my email address. Email me your time, date, location of birth, and I will create for you a short personalized recording telling you about what the entrance of Uranus into Taurus means for you in your birth chart personally. So I run these specials once in a while when there's a big astrological event. Usually I just see people for birth chart readings and forecast readings and things like that, but once in a while I'll do a shortened reading and just take up donations for them and give a suggested range. And I ask that if you can afford more, please give more. That helps for people who can't afford as much. You'll get a little MP3 recording, or you'll get an MP4, I should say, just like this. You'll see me, you'll see your chart. I'll show you exactly where Uranus is going in your birth chart and talk about it. Now, one of the reasons that this is a really important transit is because outer planets like Uranus take about 84 years to go around the sun, and it's only once every somewhere between 7 and 8 years that they move fully from one sign to another, which means they're also changing houses in your chart. Traditional astrologers use what are called whole sign houses. And so when a planet changes signs, it changes houses. So it starts affecting a totally different sphere of activity and a different set of topics in your life. So if you want to know more about how this major change from Uranus in Aries to Uranus in Taurus is going to affect you personally, again, visit my website, nightlightastrology.com. Go to the events page. You'll see a drop-down menu. Then there's a donations and payment tab. Click on the donate button. Choose anywhere between $40 and $75 as a suggested range. And then after you've done that, email me at nightlightastrology@gmail.com and tell me I'd like a Uranus and Taurus report. And here is my time, date, and location of birth. And also, I should put, give me your preferred email address if it's not the one that you're sending from, so that I can send you the download link for your recording. Now, I have quite a few of these, so these will be going on throughout the month of May and into June. But don't worry if you don't get yours right away. This is a transit that is going to be in effect for you basically for the next year. So, and beyond. But the next year is when the entrance is really happening, starting on May 15th. So even if you get it in the middle of June, because I have such a long list of these to do, it'll still be really useful information that you're going to want to re-listen to, several times at least in a year ahead, to really, kind of tune back into it and get the most out of it. Afterward, I always encourage people to email me and tell me about, how things, like as this transit goes on, I love hearing your stories. So please email me and tell me about them too. I learned so much as an astrologer through that. And then if you can't afford anything, you can't make a purchase right now, check out astrograph.com, go to the horoscope section, click on the link to your sun, moon, or rising sign, and you can read something free that's there that also talks just a little bit about these transits this month. All right, so I'm going to clear everything now. We're going to talk about what's coming up. So first of all, in the days ahead, here are some of the big transits. If I can get my cursor back. There we go. So as the month opens, we've just crossed over a big full moon that was happening with Pluto Mars pretty closely conjoined with Pluto. So that was a big full moon right at the end of April. We're starting off in a new month now, and as that month, as this month of May gets going, two big transits that are happening in the first week. There's several of them actually. The Sun is moving into an opposition with Jupiter, which is usually a pretty nice transit. And then Mercury is moving into a square with Pluto and a square with Mars. And then Venus is moving through a square with Neptune. So these are things that are, I would call them like mid-level transits. They're not like Uranus and Taurus, which is once every 7 or 8 years, and they're fast moving, so they don't last very long. But they're dynamic, and they're things that I'll be covering in my written column throughout the month too. So here's what they look like. We're going to talk about, each one of them kind of individually. So Mercury is going to be moving through a square with Pluto between May 6th and May 7th. That's Sunday and Monday. And then it will move through a square with Mars a little bit later, like May 11th, 12th, 13th, right around there. And then it'll move into Taurus. So let's start with the Pluto square, which is May 6th, May 7th. Mercury is the lord of communication, speech, knowledge, intellect, information, technology. We sort of worship at the altar of Mercury these days because we live in an age where information is really our biggest drug. Gossip, commentary, blogs, writing, we are all on information plans. We are always streaming information. So information is the ruler of information is Hermes Mercury. And when Mercury goes through a square with Pluto, who's the lord of the underworld, Hades, the god of death, depth, purgation, transformation, I always like to say with Pluto, it's as though you're opening up your refrigerator door one morning and finding that something has expired. And you're like, okay, well, there was nothing that smelled bad in my fridge last night, but now this morning something's gone bad. So with Mercury and Pluto, you're looking at a transformation, a critical melting point or a transformation. Sometimes it's I've bottled up something for too long and now I've got to say it. It's damaging information being leaked to the public in the political sphere. it's already, you're seeing it, for example, with Mercury just days away from this transit. I mean, we're talking about 4 days away from it, so it's already engaging. It's already in what we call an engagement, and very close to one. So when it gets within about 3 degrees, and we see Kanye West saying slavery was a choice. You know, these kinds of controversial and somewhat potentially damaging or ignorant comments or things like that that are released into the public that create great controversy. So words and speech and journalism and information and false information and things reaching a boiling point, putting your foot in your mouth. You want to be careful for all of that, because Pluto can be very explosive. It can reveal things that have been hidden or pent up inside, and kind of, it's that Freudian slip that's just the worst possible thing you could have said, but it somehow reveals something that's sort of true. It's embarrassing, and that's Mercury Pluto. Mercury Pluto is also forcefulness in speech, coerciveness, manipulation, depth, darkness, and power in speech. And Mercury's in a Mars-ruled sign right now, Aries, which is pretty intense and combative and fiery. This is the courage to look at things in truth the way they are, to speak the truth, to speak truth to power. This is the uncovering of something secret or hidden. This is also about the death or transformation of a way of thinking, talking. This is personal confession time with Mercury Pluto. So you've got that energy coming in, and then remember, by the middle of the month, you've also got Mercury is going to move right into a conjunction with Uranus and square to Mars. So the communication dynamics, what we're saying, what we're speaking, how we're communicating, the essence of who we are to other people, going through some significant changes this month. Technology can change. That's a part of this as well. Like, you might need to reorganize or restructure something digital or something online. If you have a marketing approach that's about the way that you share or communicate yourself. This is also about the deepening of knowledge, the deepening of one's understanding, the potential for a death and rebirth mentally or cognitively, or even in terms of how you relate to one another in speech and relationships. It's also a really good period all the way through the middle of the month, with Mercury moving into the Uranus conjunction later in the month. That's going to happen. Let's move forward now. You can see it. So this will be about May 6th, May 7th is a square to Pluto. Then, as you see, it's closing in on a square to Mars. So you can see here's Mercury, and it's coming close to Uranus, and then it's square to Mars right here. And so what's going to happen as the month goes on is Mercury's going to catch, see how it's going to catch Uranus and square Mars. That's going to happen about May 12th and 13th. Right after that happens, on the 15th, Uranus enters Taurus and Mars squares Uranus as it enters Aquarius. We'll hold off on that for a minute, but the kind of discovery, the kind of shift mentally and intellectually that can happen is big. Discovery, epiphany, inventiveness, new ideas, ways of thinking about, like strategies can really shift and change, become more practical, groundbreaking ways of dealing with something, or a new approach to something, getting rid of things that don't work. So one thing that we've been doing as Mercury's been through a back and forth, but actually all of these planets already through his retrogradation and her retrogradation in Aries, has been this wristband challenge, the Kind Words, Clean Heart challenge. And in this challenge, we've been trying to go, there's about 400 of us who have these wristbands now, who have been trying to keep the wristband on one wrist. And if you say something that's mean or cutting or harsh, critical toward someone else, and you switch the wristband, and you're trying to go 21 days with keeping it on one wrist, it's really challenging. And the idea, though, is that if you change things on the gross level, on the level of your speech, that slowly you start to change things on the mental level, which is a lot harder, right? It'd be a lot harder if we had to switch the band every time we had a critical thought, but it starts to change when you work on your words. It changes the subtle level. Well, this is what a big part of the Mercury square to Pluto, Saturn, Mars, Venus. Mercury's been really churning the past month through Aries, really confronting things. It's been a good transit for that kind of thing. So okay, so at any rate, let's go back. So we're coming through this critical Mercury portal this month. Now, as we go, the other big transit that's coming up is the Sun opposite to Jupiter, and that happens around May 8th. Now, the Sun opposite Jupiter is about things getting bigger. Here you have the Sun, a source of light, knowledge, wisdom, growth. It's life-giving, and it's opposite Jupiter, which is the planet of faith, hope, growth, expansion. Jupiter in the ancient world was basically associated in its qualities were hot and moist, the qualities necessary for plant life to grow and flourish. And so Jupiter is a planet on a very basic sort of elemental level that makes things grow, that makes them bigger. Okay, well, things can get bigger. But what does that mean? Well, people are sometimes surprised to find out that Jupiter and the Sun together oftentimes show up when men, especially men, because both Jupiter and the Sun are often associated with more paternal or masculine figures, but not always. They'll pass away, they'll pass over, they'll make their passage to the next life, the next body, or maybe they'll return home to God. The Sun-Jupiter opposition is known for example, heart attacks, because you have the heart enlarging, or you have the heart rupturing. You have the idea of the opposition between the Sun and Jupiter as something that can also be about the release of the spirit from the body, the literal transmigration of the soul. The Sun was associated with the soul in ancient astrology. So there's a great flush of wisdom that comes at the end of our life when we are preparing to cross over, and we're having the out-of-body sort of experience that is sometimes described as a life review. This is a Jupiterian experience in a sense, because it's an incredibly expansive download of a massive amount of information. Your whole life flashes before your eyes. It's a condensed kind of experience of wisdom, and you are fitted to, in a sense, to the next body and the next incarnation based on the karma that's accruing throughout many lifetimes, throughout your most recent lifetime. And the wisdom that comes in that moment could be described as a sort of Sun-Jupiter opposition. Now, that doesn't mean we should all be obsessed or like worried, oh, I'm going to die, or something like that, or that anyone's going to die. But you can take these as metaphors, that there's expansion and wisdom coming at once, and that sometimes those moments are like condensed, and they can pack in a lot of light and illumination. But whenever there's a lot of light and illumination, sometimes it's because something is ready to go. In astrology, there are two cliches uttered more than anything else, and that's birth and death, because they're the great metaphors for transformation. Everything in the material world is always in change. It's always in a state of flux and transformation. Taoists believe this, yogis believe this, Buddhists believe this. Everything here is impermanent. Everything here is always moving. Now, the spirit or the soul, of course, on the other hand, is unchanging and eternal. And so that ground of being is ultimately beyond the language of astrology. The ground of our conscious existence goes beyond what a chart can show us, what a chart can tell us. What a chart is goes beyond planets, goes beyond bodies, goes beyond things, all of which in the material world will die someday. There was a time where Jupiter will be no longer, and the stars of the constellations will not exist. And it's important to keep those things in perspective when we do astrology. But that kind of perspective, where does that come from? Well, we can use the language of astrology and lots of other languages, symbolic languages, to talk about where that kind of wisdom comes from. And there's many instances in astrology, not just Sun-Jupiter instances, where that will occur. But the Sun-Jupiter opposition is one such occurrence where great download of wisdom and growth and expansion can come. Of course, the flip side is going to extremes, getting puffed up, getting on a high horse, speaking about things that you don't know through practice, that you don't, for example, there's many times where we can understand something on an intellectual level from reading it in a book, or from hearing someone give a talk, or something like that. But it's a different thing to realize the knowledge or information through practice, whether that's astrology or whether that's a skill or like an art form that you're learning, or if it's something spiritual or whatever. The actual embodied knowledge is something that's very different, and it requires surrendering ourselves usually to a form of practice before the embodied wisdom can come through. Well, sometimes the Sun-Jupiter opposition is about hubris, it's about pride, it's about saying we know something before we really know it, in which case it can also be associated with a fall, the pride that comes before the fall. The pride and the fall are interconnected. Even for ancient astrologers, the concept of an exaltation, a planetary exaltation, where something is very elevated and high, was connected intimately with the opposite condition, which is when a planet was said to have fallen down into a well or depression, like a deep space of having fallen downward. The Jupiter-Sun opposition is about things that get really big and high and mighty, potentially, or there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of insight, there's a lot of growth, but also you have to be very careful, because this can be an omen that tells us about things that are getting too big for their britches. Things that, we have to be careful about teachers or people who show up in our lives around these transits, for example, and we say, gosh, they've got all the enthusiasm in the world, but the real question is, do they practice what they preach? Or or at the same time, we might feel confident about something and we might lack preparation somehow. So these are just, things to be mindful of. And remember, every transit in astrology, two things. Some transits are destined, which means you don't have any control over them. It's not a matter of choice. Just like in the way that if you plant something in a garden and there's natural conditions of life like rain and sunshine, it'll grow. And most of the time, unless there's different kinds of circumstances, the natural thing that the plant will do is blossom at a certain time. That's its nature, and the material world works like that. So these transits are oftentimes reflecting things that are ready to grow and ready to appear and blossom, that our choices have impregnated as seeds of karma long ago, and they have a life of their own, and so they're about to blossom. Just like if you eat pizza for 25 years straight, what that's going to do to your health and your heart and your blood sugar and your blood pressure and all this other stuff, after a certain amount of time, is out of your control. You get to 20 years in, even if you say, I have the best change of attitude about this ever, I'm going to change my diet, right? You might still be due up for some health problems. That doesn't mean you shouldn't change. It doesn't mean you don't have free will to make a turn. It doesn't mean that in some cases you can't turn everything around and nothing's going to happen. But a lot of the times in life, there are things that are destined to occur. And astrology is always on some level showing us things that are destined to occur. You could literally try to put a stick in between your teeth and bite on it during a Mercury-Saturn transit, and somehow you'll find a way of biting through the stick and saying something a little too harsh to someone. Sometimes that's just how it happens. On the other hand, the second thing in astrology, the second little truth is that we are always participating in the transits as well. And so there is a level at which we are aware of things like the Sun opposite Jupiter, and so we can do something, and so we should do something. So here we have wisdom, growth, expansion, but also don't get too big. Don't overestimate yourself. Don't overestimate someone else. Don't, practice what you preach. Don't be on a high horse. So be careful of those things as well. All right, so that's Sun opposite Jupiter. Now the next big one that's coming is coming basically at exactly the same time between May 7th and May 8th, right as the Sun, Jupiter oppose. Venus will square Neptune. Now, Venus, the planet of love, cleanliness, beauty, harmony, diplomacy, sensuality, desire, art, right? So the goddess. Now she's in Gemini. She's in Mercury's temple right now. So she's really she's doing a lot of thinking. She's communicative. She's trying to potentially look at the aesthetics of information, the aesthetics and beauty of speech. She's learning things that are beautiful, design maybe oriented things. So she's in a more technical, airy, intellectual, mercurial sign right now. She's in a masculine sign. She's more outgoing, a little tricky, a little clever, a little dual-natured Gemini kind of feeling for Venus right now. And you look for the trickster and the woman and the trickster, the woman and the artist, the woman and the poet, the feminine and the intelligentsia. They kind of go together right now. Venus is making a square to Neptune, and Neptune, of course, is a planet that is related to basically our desire, our thirst for something transcendental, and the way that that very overpowering level of desire for something bigger than ourselves will take over our lives and fuel us with that desire in either a negative or a positive sense. So, for example, in a negative sense, Venus square Neptune can be about falling in love with something that's not real. In the positive sense, Venus-Neptune can be about inspirations of the ideal and the divine and the transcendental. So Venus square Neptune could be high religious art. Venus square Neptune could be artistic and spiritual matters, or sensuality and the divine. It could be youthfulness and creativity and something otherworldly. But quite honestly, it can also be about delusions. Delusions about something being beautiful when it's actually selfish, something being attractive when it's actually narcissistic. In other words, sometimes we think that something is quite beautiful, and the only reason we do is because it gives us the feeling that we're looking into the perfect mirror, So, and the ultimate goal is not to grow, but it is to flatter ourselves. Well, that's something that we all deal with, But Venus square Neptune can also be about someone that you meet, a friend, a lover, your own marriage partner, some change in a relationship that forces you to grow in empathy and compassion. It's about women's issues. It's about global humanitarianism and women's issues. So this Venus-Neptune transit, you also have to be very careful of, Venus-Neptune can be like heroin and alcohol and anything that you desire that stimulates the nervous system, especially that either depresses it because it's overly sensitive or that speeds it up because maybe you feel bored. Either way, Neptune can fill you with the desire to stimulate, arouse yourself in a state like, I'm bored, I want to have fun, I want to feel good, I want to feel sexy, I want to feel stimulated. And Neptune can offer you the tempting drug of some kind. So you want to be very careful. That can also have to do with spending. Oh, well, this needs to be improved, doesn't look good enough, etc. I need to update my wardrobe, and then there's some state of intoxication that fills us with some sense of what we ought to be buying or whatever, and there might be some tendency to lose our clear thinking. So Venus in Gemini is also very, very smart, really intelligent Venus. Neptune square can pull her out of her better senses. So the other thing is, of course, that Venus in Gemini can use fuzzy, deceptive thinking. and Neptune can pull you into some elaborate, complex situation because you were trying to get away with something. And it'll, Neptune will complicate your life basically because of what you try to get away with. It might be, you might have some really, we all are schemers sometimes, and Venus square Neptune will entangle you. So you have to be careful of that as well. Anyway, these are all just things to think about. You could add a lot more to the list. Many of my colleagues, no doubt, will have other things to add to this as well. Now, okay, so go back over here. Lose track. Okay, so we went through the Mercury, we went through Sun, we went through Venus. Now let's go to the big one on May 15th. May 15th, 16th, we have a new moon right around the 25th degree of Taurus, very closely conjoined with Algol, the Eye of Medusa star, a star that is known for the feminine and the rage of the feminine, and also that's Medusa, and also the heroic need to rise above the temptations of the body and the lust of the body. So there's a story about, if I remember, it's Perseus, who uses the shield, which is basically the shield of reason and knowledge and wisdom. And it's a mirror, and it mirrors back Medusa's own face. So Medusa turns herself to stone, because the thing is that any hero who tries to kill Medusa can't kill this monster, because she'll turn you to stone if you look at her. So he uses a shield of wisdom, and it reflects her own face back at her, and she turns herself to stone. It's a good story about not getting lost in things that are volatile, emotional, desirous, lusty, but also the rage of the feminine. There's a real deeper feminist version of the Medusa story. I won't go into it, but as Uranus, planet of rebellion and transformation, is also entering a fixed feminine Venus-ruled sign, we're really talking about the rage of Mother Earth. Things related to the environment, things related to women, and the really intense, transformative, rebellious, awakening qualities of Uranus aiming toward those things. No really surprise that we have the new moon surrounding the Pleiades and the Eye of Medusa, all feminine symbols, and symbols that are traditionally in astrology related to difficult things as well: losing one's head, losing one's mind, weeping, death. There's a lot of more difficult, like feminine kind of like karma, I would call it, both the good and the bad, associated with those last degrees of Taurus. And then Uranus entering Taurus as well, really going to shake things up. It wouldn't surprise me within the first months, as Dimitra George just wrote about very vividly. If you like Dimitra, she's a hero of mine. She wrote about Uranus's entrance into Taurus. If you check her out, Dimitra George, so I shall type that in so you can see it. She wrote a fantastic article this month. Check out her newsletter. She might have it posted on her website as well. There's Dimitra George. She wrote about the entrance of Uranus into Taurus, and wrote in the same vein as what I plan on writing this month about the ramifications of the environment. I think that's going to be a really big deal. So that should be part of Uranus's entrance into Taurus. Of course, it's very personal, so remember, you can get that personalized Taurus report as well. But then right as that's happening, you'll notice that planet Mars is entering Aquarius and immediately making a square, and that's on the 16th. So these are massive transits. They don't get any bigger than that. They can, but it's a big one. So at any rate, Mars square Uranus is about catharsis and its rebellion and its outbursts against authority, defiance. It's being forced to awaken. It is the challenge. It's the laying down the gauntlet, and it's about Mars in Aquarius is about outsiders or things that are marginalized, and advocating, fighting, defending, protecting, as well as the victims. And that's a Saturn motif, victims. And more about that at another time because we're reaching a close here. But then the square to Uranus, and Uranus, the awakener just entering Taurus. Mars is stimulating that right away, so it's quite a burst and a kick. And you got a new moon around Algol, Uranus enters Taurus, and then boom, Mars just hits right away. So, as I said, you don't get a lot bigger than that. It's a very big deal. Now, the only other thing that's worth mentioning that I'm gonna save for basically later in the month. I'm not gonna speak so much about it now. I'll just speak to it later. Is like late in the month, the sun will change into Gemini around May 20th. Venus will enter Cancer and start to oppose Saturn. I'll be writing about that in my column, so you can stay tuned. And then you have Jupiter backing up into a trine with Neptune toward the very end of the month. Those are big transits, but since this is such a big transit, I'm just focusing for this video on the first basically half of the month. We're going to take it in stages. So, well, I hope that you all enjoyed this update. You can also check out your sun sign column, which I have posted in my newsletter and on my website. And if you have any questions or comments, you can always feel free to email me at nightlightastrology@gmail.com. All right, everyone, you take care and have a beautiful month of May. Bye.